What's a woman worth when she can't give her husband a child? Out here in the hard dirt of the Arizona Territory, 1878, the answer was simple. Less than nothing. For Serafina Hayes, that answer wasn't a whisper. It was a death sentence. And the judge, jury, and executioner was her own father. He sold her, like she was a lame horse or a dry cow. Sold her to a monster of a man who didn't want a wife. He wanted a thing. A thing for his house, a thing for his bed. But as she stood on that dusty street in the town of Redemption Gulch, her soul laid bare for the whole world to see, a shadow fell over her. He was a man caught between two worlds, an Apache warrior, and his eyes held a sorrow so deep it mirrored her own. He made an offer that would change everything, an offer that would redirect the desert winds themselves. This is the story of how a woman thrown away as worthless found her true value in the arms of a man the world had already forgotten. The silence in the Hayes homestead wasn't peace. It was a thick, heavy blanket meant to smother you. It was the silence of bitter disappointment, and its name was Serafina. For 5 long years, she'd been married to Sterling Croft. Her father, Bartholomew Hayes, had arranged the whole thing. He wasn't a father, he was a strategist, and this marriage was his masterpiece. It was supposed to join two ranches, two bloodlines. It was supposed to build a dynasty, but it had built nothing. No sons to take the land, no daughters to marry off for more land. Just 5 years of shame, 5 years of Sterling's touch growing colder and colder, until it wasn't there at all. Then came the final humiliation. Sterling took a new wife, a girl of 17, already swelling with child. He stood in the center of the Redemption Gulch Saloon, the only one in town, and he raised a glass. He told the whole world that Serafina Hayes was a dry well, a field of salt. The words echoed through the territory. Her father had to take her back, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't stand the disgrace. At 24, Serafina felt like she was 100 years old. Days were spent in that suffocating quiet, with her father's eyes always on her, always accusing. Bartholomew was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of the canyon rock himself, all hard angles and harder principles. To him, everything had a use, a value. A horse that couldn't be ridden was sent to the glue factory. A cow that gave no milk was butchered for meat. And a daughter who couldn't produce a son, she was a liability, a drain on his wallet. "He is coming this afternoon," Bartholomew said. He didn't even look at her. He just kept polishing a big silver belt buckle, his movements sharp and angry. He didn't have to say the name. The name had been a ghost in the house for a week. Serafina's hands, raw from lye soap, froze over the bread dough she was kneading. "Father?" she whispered. Her mother, Agnes, flinched by the fireplace. Her knitting needles clicked like terrified insects. Agnes was a shadow of her husband. She offered no comfort, just worried looks that vanished the second you tried to meet them. "Corcoran Holt," Bartholomew finally said, looking up. His eyes were the color of a faded work shirt and just as tough. "He's a man of means, a widower. His land borders the southern pass. He needs a housekeeper, a woman to manage his home." The words were chosen so carefully, but the real meaning was as ugly as a shard of broken glass. Corcoran Holt was almost 70, a big, wheezing man who smelled of stale sweat and cheap cigars. His first two wives had died young. People whispered about it. They said things, terrible things. He didn't want a housekeeper. He wanted a replacement, a possession. Serafina felt the blood rush from her face. "You can't be serious." "Do not play the fool, girl," Bartholomew snapped. The buckle hit the table with a crack. "You are used goods, damaged. No decent man will have you now. Your purpose as a wife is over. Sterling made sure the entire territory knows it." He took a breath, his eyes glittering with a strange kind of pride. "Holt is offering a solution. He will take you off my hands. He is willing to compensate me for the trouble of your upbringing." Compensate, the word just hung there in the air. Vile. He was selling her. For money. Her own father was selling her because her body had failed his ambitions. "Mother?" Serafina pleaded, her eyes darting to the woman by the fire. Agnes wouldn't look at her. "Your father knows what's best, Serafina. Mr. Holt is a respected man. You will be provided for. Provided for? Serafina's voice shook with a rage she hadn't felt in years, a rage she thought had died. I'll be his slave. You know the stories about him. Stories are for gossips and children, Swart Bartholomew thundered. He stood up and his shadow covered half the room. The arrangement is made. Holt has been generous, 50 head of prime cattle, and he's canceling my debt at the general store. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. A fine price for a barren woman. The cruelty of it knocked the wind right out of her. A fine price. She looked at the man who gave her life, and all she saw was a merchant, a man looking at his goods, calculating his profit, and she was a loss he was finally cutting. Tears, hot and useless, burned her eyes. I will not go. Bartholomew crossed the room in 2 long strides. He didn't hit her. He was too controlled for that. Instead, he grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her skin, forcing her to look at him. His voice was a low hiss, more dangerous than any shout. You will go. You will go with him, and you will be grateful. You will do your duty. Whatever he decides that duty is. You are a Hayes, and you will not bring any more shame on this family by acting like a wild animal. Is that understood? His grip was like a steel trap. His eyes held no pity, no love. They were the eyes of a stranger closing a deal. She could see her own terrified face reflected in them. Defeated, she gave a single jerky nod. He let her go, and she stumbled back against the table. The dough, the symbol of the home she was meant to build, sat there like a pale, shapeless mockery of her life. Later that afternoon, a carriage rolled up. A fancy carriage, black and polished, totally out of place in the dirt and mud of their ranch. Corcoran Holt pulled himself out. He was even more disgusting up close. His face was a pile of fleshy folds, with 2 little greedy eyes that moved all over Serafina's body, like she was a piece of meat on a hook. He and her father spoke in low voices on the porch. She saw a leather pouch, heavy with coins, pass from Holt's hand to her father's. The final payment. Holt grinned, showing a row of yellow rotting teeth. The girl looks healthy enough, he wheezed. His eyes stayed on her chest. She'll do. Serafina, her father called, his voice flat. Mr. Holt is ready to take you to your new home. Her new home. Her new cage. She picked up her little bundle, 2 dresses, a brush, and an old book her grandmother had given her. She walked past her mother, who sat like a statue carved from fear. No goodbye, not even a touch of her hand. As Serafina stepped out onto the porch, into the blinding afternoon sun, she felt a cold, terrifying emptiness. She was completely and utterly alone. An object, sold and delivered. Holt's big, sweaty hand closed around her arm. As he led her to the carriage, she looked past her father's land, toward the hazy blue mountains in the distance. Apache land. A place of wildness, of freedom she would never know. And in that one moment, she would have given anything, anything at all, just to run. To run into that wilderness until it swallowed her whole. But Holt's grip was tight, a promise of the prison that was waiting for her. The ride to town was a special kind of hell. Serafina was crushed into the corner of the carriage. The fancy velvet seats felt like a joke. Holt took up most of the space, his huge body crowding her, his loud, wheezing breath filling the hot, stuffy air. He didn't talk. She was grateful for that, but he never stopped looking at her. His little eyes moved over her, again and again. It was a look of ownership. The way a man looks at a new rifle or a new horse before he breaks it in. It made her skin crawl. She thought they were heading to his ranch, out past the southern pass. She was wrong. The carriage didn't leave town. It rolled right down the main street and pulled up in front of the Redemption Gulch Saloon, the very same place Sterling had publicly destroyed her. It was the middle of the day. Men were standing around on the boardwalk, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Every single head turned when the fancy carriage stopped. A small matter of business, Holt grunted. He climbed out, then reached back in and pulled her out after him. His grip on her arm felt like it would leave bruises. A public deal needs a public seal. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through her. He wasn't just taking her. He was parading her. He was making a show of it, a spectacle of his new purchase. He dragged her right onto the boardwalk and stood her beside him, like a prize pig at the fair. The talking stopped. The blacksmith, Mr. Abernathy, froze with his hammer in the air. The whole town was watching, and her father, Bartholomew Hayes, was already there. He was standing with the town's land registrar, a little weasel of a man named Peterson. Her father wouldn't even look at her. He just stared at the piece of paper in Peterson's hand. As agreed, Hayes. Holt's voice boomed across the street. It was thick with satisfaction. 50 head of cattle, the debt at Miller's Mercantile, cleared in full, and this bonus. He held up the same pouch of coins he'd given her father. A sign of good faith. He paused, making sure everyone was listening. All in exchange for the wardship and domestic service of your daughter, Seraphina Hayes. The words were just a fancy legal costume for a very ugly truth. Wardship, domestic service. He was buying her, and he was making sure the entire town knew it. He wanted them all to know that she was so worthless, so broken, that her own father had sold her for some cows and store credit. The shame was a physical thing. It felt like a weight on her chest, pressing the air from her lungs. She stared down at the dusty wooden planks of the boardwalk, just wishing they would crack open and swallow her whole. And that's when a figure stepped out of the deep shadows of the alleyway. He didn't walk like the other men in town, with their heavy, clumsy boots. He moved with a kind of fluid grace, silent and sure. He was tall and lean, built for a life of hardship she couldn't even imagine. His black hair was long, held back with a simple leather tie. He wore buckskin pants and a plain cotton shirt, the clothes of a man who lived between two worlds. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were dark, and they held a sadness so deep and so old it felt familiar. He was Apache. In Redemption Gulch, the Apache were feared. They were tolerated for trade, but never, ever trusted. But this man, he carried himself with a kind of quiet authority that made all their stupid prejudices seem small and petty. He stopped just a few feet away, and his gaze wasn't on Holt or on her father. It was on her, and in his eyes she saw something no one else had shown her. He didn't see a piece of property. He didn't see a barren woman. He saw a person trapped in a living nightmare. "This is not right," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmuring of the crowd like a knife. Holt spun around, his fleshy face turning a dark, angry red. "This is a private matter, Savage. It's none of your business. Get back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The Apache man didn't even flinch. His dark eyes were steady. He looked from Holt's sneering face to her father's stone-cold expression. "You sell your own blood?" he asked. The question was so simple, but it hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Bartholomew's jaw clenched. "She is my daughter, to do with as I see fit. The law's on my side." He pointed a shaking finger at Peterson, who clutched the contract like a shield. "Some laws are a sickness on the land," the warrior replied, his voice still calm. He took one step forward. It wasn't threatening, but it made everyone hold their breath. "What is your price for her?" A wave of shocked silence washed over the street. Then Holt let out a barking, ugly laugh. "My price? She's not for sale, especially not to the likes of you. The deal is done. She's mine." "The paper is not signed," the warrior observed. His eyes flicked to the document in Peterson's trembling hand. Then his gaze came back to her father. "Your price was 50 cattle and a cleared debt." Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you, Apache?" The warrior didn't answer him. He looked at Seraphina again, and for a second she saw something in his eyes. Pity, maybe, or something else. Recognition. Then he turned back to her father. "I offer a better price." The whole town leaned in. You could have heard a pin drop in the dust. 100 of my finest horses," the warrior said. "Not the small, half-wild ponies you see trading here. These are strong, fast, bred for war and for the long trail. More wealth than you would see in 10 years of ranching. They are mine to give." A collective gasp went through the crowd. 100 prime horses. It was a fortune, a king's ransom, a bride price from an old story. And it was being offered for her, a barren woman, by an Apache. The world had suddenly turned upside down. Her father was visibly stunned. You could see the war on his face, Greed fighting prejudice. 100 horses. That kind of wealth could make him the most powerful man in the territory. You don't have 100 horses, Holt spat, his voice thick with hate. You're a lying heathen savage. They are in the canyons to the west, the warrior said, his voice perfectly even. I give my word. My people do not break their word on a trade of honor. He locked his eyes on Holt. This is not a trade of honor. This is filth, but I will pay to clean it. The insult was so sharp, so direct, Holt actually staggered back a step, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. She is mine. We have an agreement. You have a piece of paper, the warrior countered. He ignored Holt completely now, turning his full attention to Bartholomew. 100 horses, for your daughter's freedom. She will come with me. She will be under my protection. He paused, and his next words struck Seraphina like a bolt of lightning. She will be my wife, to be sold by her father, only to be bought by a stranger. But as she looked at this Apache warrior, at his quiet dignity, at the strange, deep sadness in his eyes that seemed to match the hollowness in her own soul, a tiny, impossible spark of hope caught fire in her chest. Anything was better than Corcoran Holt. A life in some hidden canyon was better than a life in his suffocating house. A life with this silent, sorrowful stranger was 1,000 times better than a life with that leering monster. Bartholomew Hayes, a man who worshipped only at the altar of profit, made his choice. The value of 100 prime horses was far greater than 50 cattle in a store debt. It was greater than his pride, greater than his duty as a father, greater than the laws of his own society. The deal with Mr. Holt is void, he announced, his voice tight. He looked at the Apache. You bring the horses to the edge of my land by the next full moon. The girl is yours. No, Holt roared, lunging forward. But the town sheriff, a fat, lazy man named Gable, finally decided to do his job and step between them. The Apache man gave her father one single, sharp nod. Then he turned to Seraphina. He didn't grab her arm like Holt had. He didn't pull her. He simply stood in front of her and held out his hand. It was a strong hand, calloused from work and weather. It was an offer, not a demand. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, she just stared at that hand. It represented a leap into an unknown so vast it was almost as terrifying as the fate she'd just escaped. Then, her own hand trembling, Seraphina lifted it and placed it in his. His grip was firm, but surprisingly gentle. Without another word, he turned and led her away. Away from the stunned crowd, away from her father who was already calculating his new wealth, away from the sputtering, apoplectic rage of Corcoran Holt. He led her past the staring faces of the townsfolk, toward the edge of town where two strong horses were tied, and into a future she could not possibly imagine. The silence on the trail was nothing like the silence in her father's house. This was a living quiet. It was filled with the whisper of wind through the sagebrush, the high, lonely cry of a hawk circling overhead, the steady, rhythmic drumbeat of their horses' hooves on the dry, cracked earth. The warrior, he still hadn't told her his name, rode ahead of her. He sat his horse with an easy grace, as if he were part of the animal. He'd given her the gentler mount, a sturdy mare that walked with a calm, even gait. Seraphina felt like she was floating, suspended in a state of shock, adrift between a past that had spit her out and a future that was a complete and terrifying mystery. She was the wife of an Apache warrior. The idea was so insane, so completely opposite to every story she'd ever been told, her mind couldn't quite wrap around it. She kept watching his back, the way his long black hair was tied, the powerful line of his shoulders under his simple shirt. He was a puzzle, a savior and a captor, all at the same time. He led them away from the known trails, following paths that were invisible to her. They wound through narrow, dusty arroyos, climbed up steep, rocky slopes, and crossed high mesas that opened up to breathtaking views of the vast, sun-scorched land. The country was brutal and beautiful all at once, a landscape painted in reds and oranges and deep purples, all under a sky so big and blue it hurt to look at. It was a different universe from the small, dusty cage of Redemption Gulch. As the sun began to bleed across the horizon, staining the clouds orange and pink, they arrived. And the place was not what she expected, not at all. Tucked into a small, sheltered valley, hidden from the world, was a spring. It fed a grove of green cottonwood trees, an oasis in the middle of the desert. And there, nestled amongst the trees, was not a collection of hide teepees, but a single solid cabin. It was built from stone and thick timber logs, with a proper roof and a sturdy door. A small, neat garden grew off to one side, and three more horses stood in a simple corral. They whinnied a soft welcome as they approached. The warrior swung down from his horse and came to her side. He offered his hand to help her down. His touch was brief, professional, but it still sent a strange shiver through her. For the first time since they left town, he spoke directly to her. "This is my home," he said. "You are safe here." His name, he told her then, was Kale. Just Kale. The inside of the cabin was simple, clean, and orderly. A big stone hearth took up most of one wall, with a neat stack of firewood beside it. In the center of the room stood a sturdy table and two chairs. In the corner, a bed, covered with thick, warm-looking furs. On a set of shelves were a few clay pots, some woven baskets, and a small, surprising stack of books, their leather covers worn with use. The whole place spoke of a quiet, solitary life. Serafina stood awkwardly by the door, still clutching her little bundle of belongings. She had no idea what the rules were here. What did he expect from her? Was she a wife in name only? Or was she now expected to perform duties? The fear that had been numbed by the shock of her rescue came flooding back. Kale seemed to sense her panic. He didn't come near her. Instead, he went to the hearth and began to build a fire, his movements efficient and calm. "You are hungry," he said. It wasn't a question. He prepared a simple meal of dried meat and beans, with corn cakes he cooked on a flat stone heated by the fire. He set a plate for her at the table, then sat across from her with his own, eating in silence. The quiet was excruciating. At her father's house, she was used to angry silences. This was different. It wasn't angry. It was deep, unreadable, a canyon of its own. She forced herself to eat, her throat tight with anxiety. "Why?" The word escaped her, barely a whisper. "Why did you do it? Pay such a price?" Kale finished what was in his mouth, his dark eyes watching the flames dance in the hearth. "I have seen men sell horses," he said, his voice low and steady. "I have seen them sell cattle. I have never seen a man sell his own child. It is a thing without honor." "But to make me your wife," she pressed, "a white woman, a stranger." He finally turned his gaze from the fire and looked at her, and the profound sadness she had first seen in his eyes was there again, deeper now in the flickering firelight. "My wife," he said softly, "died 3 winters ago. The coughing sickness took her." He looked down at his hands. "My son followed a week later." The words were so stark, so heavy with pain, they stole the air from her lungs. The cabin, which had just felt empty, now felt full of ghosts, and suddenly she understood. The deep loneliness he carried was a weight just as heavy as her own shame. He wasn't just rescuing her, he was trying to fill a hole in his own life, a hole carved out by unbearable loss. They were two broken, solitary people, thrown together by a cruel world. "I am sorry," she said. The words felt small and useless. He gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. He gathered their plates, then gestured to the bed in the corner. "You should rest. You will take the bed." "And you?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I will be by the fire." He laid out a bedroll on the floor, his actions making it clear that it wasn't a negotiation. He had bought her. He had called her his wife in front of the whole town. But he was demanding nothing. He was offering her sanctuary, and nothing more. That night, Serafina lay in the surprisingly comfortable bed, the smell of wood smoke and clean furs all around her. Across the dark room, she could hear the slow, steady rhythm of Kale's breathing. She had been shamed, sold, and disowned by her own family. She had been bought and claimed by a man whose people her own kind feared and hated. And yet, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a piece of property. She felt safe. The silence of the cabin was no longer frightening. It was a shared quiet, a space where two wounded souls could simply exist, side by side, without the world's judgment pressing in on them. Sleep, which had been a stranger to her for so long, finally came and found her, there in the deep, silent heart of the desert. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm, a life governed not by the harsh judgments of men, but by the rising and setting of the sun. Serafina quickly learned that Kale was a man who needed nothing from the outside world. He hunted with a silent skill that amazed her, tanned his own hides, and tended his small garden with a gentle, surprising patience. He was a man of very few words, but his actions told her everything. He showed her which plants in the valley were good to eat and which were medicine. He taught her how to find the North Star in the vast, ink-black night sky. He never told her what to do, but she found herself wanting to help, to contribute. She took over the cooking, learning to use the dried corn and beans and wild herbs he brought her. She mended his clothes, the familiar work of a needle and thread, a small comfort in this strange new life. She kept the cabin clean and orderly, finding a sense of purpose in the very tasks that had felt like a prison back at her father's ranch. Here they were not duties demanded of her. They were offerings, freely given. Slowly, like a spring bubbling up through dry ground, a fragile understanding began to form between them. She learned that he wasn't an outcast from his people. He chose to live apart. His father had been a chief, but Cale had grown tired of the endless conflict, of the treaties made with the white men only to be broken again and again. After his wife and son had died, he told her one evening the noise of the village camp had become too much to bear. Every laughing child, every woman's song was a constant, stabbing reminder of what he had lost. He preferred the quiet of his hidden valley, but their little island of peace couldn't stay isolated forever. Once a month, Cale would ride to Redemption Gulch. He'd trade the pelts he'd trapped and some of the medicinal herbs that grew in the valley for things he couldn't make himself. Flour, salt, coffee. The first time he prepared to go after she arrived, he looked at her. "Do you want to come?" The thought of it, of facing those staring, judging eyes, of hearing the whispers, filled her with a cold dread. "I will stay here," she said quietly. He just nodded, his face giving nothing away. He returned late that evening, even more silent than usual. As he unpacked the supplies from his saddlebags, he placed a small, cloth-wrapped parcel on the table in front of her. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a new bar of lavender-scented soap and a bolt of deep blue calico fabric, enough for a whole new dress. It was a gift, a simple, thoughtful luxury, something no one had given her in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "The town talks," he said. His back was to her as he stored the sacks of flour. "Holt has put a price on my head, a bounty." Serafina's blood ran cold. "He tells everyone I stole you." "Stole me?" she said, her voice rising in disbelief. "The whole town saw the bargain. My father agreed." "The law in that town," Cale replied, his voice flat and hard, "is whatever the richest man says it is. Sheriff Gable does what Holt pays him to do. Holt's pride is wounded, and that is a very dangerous thing in a weak man." Suddenly, the safety of their valley felt thin and fragile. The ugly world outside, with its greed and its hate, was pressing in on them. And the threat wasn't just coming from the white world. One afternoon, while Serafina was gathering herbs near the spring, two women appeared at the edge of the trees. They moved as silently as shadows. They were older, Apache women, their faces lined and weathered like ancient maps. They just stood there, watching her with hard, assessing eyes. She knew instantly they were from Cale's tribe, his family. One of them, a woman named Sonsi, finally spoke. Her English was rough, heavily accented. "You are the white woman, the one he paid a chief's price for." It wasn't a question. Serafina straightened up, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I am. He grieved too long for his family," the other woman said, her voice sharp as a flint knife. "To bring one of them here, to his wife's home, it is an insult to her memory." The words hit her like a slap. Here, too, she was an outsider, an unwelcome ghost. "I did not ask for this," Serafina said, her own voice shaking just a little. "And I am not trying to replace anyone." Sonsi took a step closer. Her dark eyes swept over Serafina, taking in her plain, mended dress, her hands calloused now from gardening, and grinding corn. She wasn't looking at a pampered rancher's daughter. She was looking at a woman who worked. Kale walks a lonely path, Sonsi said, her voice a little softer now. He has a good heart, but it is a broken one. If you break it further, the spirits will not forgive you. It was a warning, clear and absolute. They watched her for a few moments more, then turned and melted back into the landscape, as silent as they had come. She told Kale about the visit when he returned from hunting that evening. He let out a long, weary sigh. It was a rare sign of frustration from him. They are my mother's sisters. They worry. They do not understand. They think I am an insult to your wife's memory, Serafina said. She couldn't keep the hurt out of her voice. Kale stopped what he was doing. He turned and faced her, and for the first time, he really looked at her with an intensity that went beyond just seeing. My wife was named Tala, he said, his voice soft. She was brave, and she was kind. My son was named Niol. It means wind. They are not memories that can be insulted. They are a part of my spirit that is gone. He held her gaze. You are not their replacement, Serafina. You are something new, something I did not expect. The simple, quiet honesty of his words touched a place deep inside her, a place she thought had turned to stone years ago. He wasn't comparing her. He wasn't asking her to be anyone but herself. In that one moment, the huge canyon between their two different worlds seemed to shrink. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the valley, and thunder cracked and echoed off the canyon walls. In the middle of it, a sudden, violent crash from the corral sent them both running outside into the rain. In the blinding flashes of lightning, they saw it. A section of the corral fence was smashed, and a huge mountain lion was on one of the horses, its claws tearing into the terrified animal's back. Without a single thought, Kale grabbed his rifle. But in the pouring rain and the chaotic darkness, getting a clean shot was impossible. The horse screamed, a sound of pure terror. And then Sarafina did something she couldn't explain. Acting on pure instinct, she reached into the hearth, grabbed a burning log from the fire, ignoring the searing heat, and ran straight toward the fight. She screamed at the top of her lungs, waving the burning brand like a sword. The big cat, startled by the sudden fire and the shrieking assault, let go of the horse. It spun around, snarling at her, its yellow eyes glowing in the dark. For one heart-stopping second, the beast crouched, ready to spring at her. And in that second, Kale found his shot. The crack of the rifle was as loud as the thunder. The great cat crumpled and fell. Shaking and soaked to the bone, Serafina stood over the wounded, trembling horse. Kale rushed to her side, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Admiration. He looked from her to the dead cougar and back again. That, he said, his voice rough with emotion, was the bravest, most foolish thing I have ever seen. It was your horse, she said, her own voice trembling now that the danger was past. He reached out his hand and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a drop of rain. It was the first time he had ever touched her with anything like tenderness. And just like that, the invisible wall between them, the one that had already been cracking, crumbled into dust. There in the heart of the storm, they both realized something. The whispers in town, the threats from the outside world, they didn't matter as much as the quiet, fierce bond that had grown between them in the shelter of their hidden valley. In the weeks after the mountain lion attack, everything was different. The careful, formal distance Kale had always kept was gone. In its place was a quiet intimacy, a new language spoken in shared glances across the fire, in the light brush of his hand against hers as they worked side by side in the garden. The invisible line he had drawn on the cabin floor, his bedroll by the fire, her in the bed, it just disappeared. One night after a long day spent tending to the wounded horse and rebuilding the corral, he didn't lay out his bedroll. He simply came to the bed and lay down beside her. It was a silent question, and her silent acceptance was the answer. It wasn't the frantic passion of young lovers. It was something quieter, deeper, a slow, gentle coming together of two people who had known so much loss, so much loneliness. It was like finding warmth after a long winter. For Serafina, it was a revelation. With Sterling, being a wife in bed had been a duty, a cold, mechanical chore with only one purpose. to make a child. With Kale, it was a shared comfort, a solace that seemed to seep into all the broken places in her soul and make her feel whole for the first time in her life. Spring came to the valley. The cottonwood trees exploded with new leaves of an impossible green, and for a few weeks the desert floor was covered in a carpet of brilliant wildflowers. And Serafina felt a change inside herself too. At first she ignored it, a sickness in her stomach in the mornings, a deep weariness in her bones that had nothing to do with hard work. She told herself it was the change in season, the richer food. The pronouncement of her barrenness was so deeply carved into her soul that the alternative was simply unthinkable. But the signs kept coming. One morning, the smell of the coffee Kale was brewing, a smell she usually loved, sent her running out of the cabin, her stomach heaving. He followed her out, a look of deep concern on his face. "Are you unwell?" he asked, his hand steady on her back. "It's nothing," she gasped. "Something I ate." But Kale's eyes, which could read the changing seasons in the sky and the coming of rain on the wind, saw what she refused to see. He looked at her, a strange new light dawning in his expression. He didn't say anything, but a few days later, he brought her a special tea he'd brewed from some leaves he'd gathered high up on the mesa. It was a woman's tea, he told her, one his mother had always given to his wife. It settled her stomach. The truth finally hit her one afternoon as she was mending one of Kale's shirts. Her monthly courses, for years a punctual, cruel reminder of her failure, were late. Not just a few days late. More than 2 months had passed. Her hand stopped moving. The needle fell from her fingers. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It was a trick, a phantom hope sent to torment her one last time. But as she placed a trembling hand on her own belly, she felt a certainty so deep, so profound, it shook her to her very core. A new life was growing inside her. The dry well, the field of salt, it had all been a lie. Maybe the doctor in Redemption Gulch had been a fool. Or maybe, just maybe, the problem had never been with her at all. Maybe it had been Sterling. It didn't matter anymore. The impossible had happened. She was pregnant. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and hot. Not tears of shame or sorrow. Tears of a joy so fierce and so overwhelming it felt like pain. Every cruel word her father had ever said, every look of disappointment, every single moment of her public humiliation, it was all being washed away in this flood of sweet, powerful vindication. She wasn't broken. She wasn't worthless. When Kale returned from checking his traps, he found her sitting at the table, just weeping. He was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, his voice tight with alarm. "Serafina? What is it? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him. Her face was a mess of tears, but her eyes were shining with a light he had never seen before. "Nothing is wrong, Kale," she whispered, her voice thick. "Everything is right." She took his hand, his strong, calloused hand that had reached out and saved her, and she placed it flat against her stomach. "I am," she said, so choked with emotion she could barely speak. "We are." He froze. His hand rested on her, his face a mask of disbelief. Then you could see it dawning. Comprehension, followed by a wave of emotion so powerful it seemed to shake his entire body. The deep, old sadness in his eyes was washed away. In its place was a look of pure, raw wonder. He dropped to his knees in front of her. He put his other hand on her belly beside the first, as if he could feel the miracle right through her simple dress. "Nail," he breathed, the name of his lost son, a ghost on the air. Then he shook his head, clearing away the past to make room for the future. He looked up into her eyes, and she saw that his own were glistening with tears. "A child," he said, his voice cracking. "Our child." The curse that had defined her entire life was broken. The shame that had been her only companion was gone. In this hidden valley with a man the world called a savage, she had found more than just safety. She had found love. And she had found the one thing she had been told she could never, ever have, the hope of a family. But as they held each other, wrapped in the profound joy of their miracle, neither of them realized that a secret that powerful, a truth that so completely destroyed the lies told in Redemption Gulch, could never stay a secret for long. Hope was like a seed planted in the desert, but the news of its growth was about to sweep out of their peaceful valley like a thunderstorm, right into the ears of a man who would see it not as a blessing, but as the deepest, most unforgivable insult of all. News in the territory traveled like wildfire. It was carried by trappers and prospectors, whispered from one lonely campfire to the next. A rumor in a saloon in one town was a fact in a general store 100 miles away by the end of the week. The news of Serafina's miracle started with Sonsi, Kale's aunt. She visited the valley again, but this time her eyes weren't hard with suspicion. They were soft with a woman's knowing wisdom. She saw the change in Serafina's body, the new, fierce way Kale watched over her. She left not with a warning, but with a gift, a piece of deerskin, tanned so soft it felt like velvet, for a baby's wrapping. Sonsi spoke of the news with pride in her own camp. And from the Apache camp, the story began to leak out. An Apache trader, in Redemption Gulch for supplies, mentioned it to Miller, the owner of the mercantile, while they were haggling over the price of sugar. The barren white woman, he said, the one Kale bought for a king's ransom and horses? She was swelling with his child. Miller, the biggest gossip in the territory, couldn't have been happier. Within a day, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. In the saloon on the boardwalk, over every dinner table in town. For most people, it was just a shocking, amusing story. A little bit of drama to liven up their boring lives. But for one man, the news was not amusing. It was an attack. Corcoran Holt heard it from Sheriff Gable. The sheriff delivered the news with a greasy smirk, hoping to get on Holt's good side. Holt had been stewing in his own wounded pride for months. Being publicly outbid by an Apache was a sore that wouldn't stop festering. He'd put that bounty on Kale's head, but no one had been stupid enough to ride into Apache territory to try and collect it. He had just assumed the woman would run off or waste away out there in the desert. But this was something else entirely. It was a personal, public, vicious assault. The woman he had bought, the barren cast-off, was fertile after all, and she was carrying the child of the very man who had shamed him. It meant everyone in town now knew for a fact that Sterling Croft, or Serafina's own father, or Holt himself, was less of a man than an Apache warrior. It made him a laughingstock. As Gable finished the story, Holt's face turned a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. With a roar of pure rage, he swept a crystal decanter of whiskey off his desk. It smashed against the far wall. "A lie!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "It's a savage's trick to mock me. She's barren." But deep down, in a cold, sick place in his gut, he knew it was true. All the pieces fit together into a perfect, infuriating picture of his own humiliation. His rage, which had been simmering for months, finally boiled over into a murderous obsession. She was his property. He had a piece of paper. A deal had been made. Therefore, the child was also his property. Tainted, yes, but his. He would reclaim what was his, and he would wipe the insult and the man who delivered it from the face of the earth. Holt started gathering his own army. He couldn't rely on the law. Even Sheriff Gable was afraid of starting an all-out war with the Apache over what he called a domestic dispute. So Holt turned to men who lived outside the law. He sent riders out to the hardscrabble mining camps, to the lawless saloons on the border. He offered a fortune in gold to any man with a fast horse and a fast gun who was willing to ride with him. His call was answered. A dozen of the territory's worst came trickling in. Army deserters, claim jumpers, men with prices on their own heads. They were drawn by the smell of Holt's money and the promise of violence. He put them under the command of a man named Finch, a cruel, hawk-nosed gunman with empty, dead eyes and a reputation for truly enjoying his work. And then, for one final sadistic twist, Holt sought out one more man. Sterling Croft, Serafina's first husband. Sterling's new young wife had recently given birth to a daughter, not the son he desperately needed. His pride was already raw. When the news hit that his barren ex-wife was pregnant with an Apache's child, it was the ultimate humiliation. It broke something inside him. When Holt came to him and offered him a chance to reclaim his honor, to help put an end to the story for good, Sterling, his face a tight mask of bitter resentment, agreed. He would see her pay for the shame she had brought on him. Back in the valley, Cale could feel the change on the wind. He was a man who could read the land like a book, and the land was telling him something was wrong. A hunting party from his tribe passed through the valley with a stark warning. Holt was gathering gunmen. They were asking questions, trying to find the location of his hidden home. The peace was over. He came back to the cabin that evening, his face grim and set like stone. He didn't have to say a word. Serafina saw it in his eyes. "It's Holt," she said. Her hand went instinctively to her swollen belly. "He is coming," Cale confirmed. "He has hired killers. They will not stop." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced right through Serafina's newfound happiness. For months she had lived in a dream, a protected world where the ugliness of her past couldn't find her. Now it was coming for her, and it was threatening the life of her unborn child. But the Serafina who heard this news was not the same terrified, helpless girl who had stood on that boardwalk. She had faced down a mountain lion. She had built a new life from the ashes of her old one. She was carrying a new life inside her, a symbol of her own strength. She would not let Holt take it from her. "What do we do?" she asked. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "You must go," Cale said, his voice strained. "My people will take you. They will hide you in the Stronghold Mountains. You will be safe there until this is over." "No." The word was sharp. "Absolute." She looked around the small cabin. Their home. She looked at Cale, the man who had shown her kindness when no one else would. "I will not run. I will not leave you. This is our home. This is our child. We will face him together." Cale looked at her, at the fierce, unbending determination in her eyes. And he saw not a weakness he had to protect, but a partner. He saw the same spirit that had charged a mountain lion with nothing but a burning stick. And he knew she was right. To run now would be to live in fear forever. This was their home. Their only chance was to make their stand right here. For the next 2 days, they prepared for war. Cale fortified the cabin, barring the windows, reinforcing the door. He checked his rifle, cleaning and oiling it, and counted out his ammunition. He showed Serafina how to load his spare pistol, and was not surprised to see that her hands were perfectly steady. They worked in a grim, focused silence. A shared purpose had hardened their resolve. They would not be victims. They would be defenders. The storm was coming, and they would be ready. The attack came in the blistering heat of the late afternoon. 13 riders spilled into the valley, their horses trampling the wildflowers. At their head was Corcoran Holt, his face triumphant. Beside him rode the hawk-nosed gunman, Finch. And just behind them, Serafina saw him, and her stomach turned to ice. Her former husband, Sterling Croft. "Cale!" Holt's voice boomed, shattering the peace of the valley. "Send out my property. You do that, and I might just let you live, savage." The only answer was silence from the stone cabin. Holt gave a signal. Finch and his men dismounted, spreading out, using the cottonwood trees for cover as they advanced. And then the valley exploded with the sound of gunfire. Inside, Cale was a rock, calm, efficient, moving from one window to the next. His shots weren't meant to kill, not yet. They were precise, aimed to kick up dirt, to drive the attackers back. He was a hunter, and this was his land. Serafina moved with him, reloading the spare rifle, her hands working automatically. Her fear was gone, burned away by a cold, protective rage. This was her home. This was her child they were trying to harm. One of the gunmen made a rush for the door, a blazing torch in his hand. Cale's rifle cracked, and the man fell. As another one started to follow, Cale was in the middle of reloading. Without a second of hesitation, Serafina raised the heavy pistol she was clutching. She fired through a small crack in the doorframe. The gunman screamed and fell back, clutching a leg. Cale shot her a quick, fierce look of pride before turning his focus back to the fight. As dusk began to settle, painting the canyon walls in long, dark shadows, an impatient Holt roared from the back of the line. "Burn them out! I want her alive, but I want him dead!" Seeing the men gathering dry brush for torches, Cale knew their time sitting in the cabin was over. A hunter does not wait for the wolves to come into his den. he said to Serafina. And then he was gone, slipping out the small back window and disappearing into the landscape he knew so well. Suddenly she was alone. She barred the door, and the silence outside was more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Then a scream from the darkness, followed by a single sharp rifle shot. Cale was no longer the hunted. He was the hunter. He moved like a phantom through the twilight, a ghost among the rocks and trees. He used his perfect knowledge of the terrain, of every shadow, every ravine, to stalk Holt's men. He picked them off, one by one. A man would step behind a tree for cover and simply not step out again. Panic ripped through the remaining gunmen. They were firing at shadows, at sounds on the wind. Sterling Croft, his face pale with terror, scrambled for his horse, trying to flee. The spooked animal reared, throwing him hard to the ground, where he lay whimpering. Soon only Holt and Finch remained. As Finch raised his pistol, aiming blindly into the woods, Serafina fired from the cabin window. Her shot went wide, but it made the gunman flinch. It gave Cale the 1 second he needed. His rifle cracked from the rocks above. Finch fell without making a sound. And then there was only Holt, a pathetic, wheezing figure, alone on his horse, his paid army of killers either dead, wounded, or gone. Cale emerged from the woods, his rifle held loosely at his side. The cabin door opened, and Serafina came out to stand beside him. A united, unbreakable front. The sight of her, strong, defiant, her hand resting on the child he had come to claim, finally shattered Holt's blustering rage. He made a strange, pathetic sobbing sound, yanked his horse's head around, and galloped away, a coward fleeing the consequences of his own consuming hatred. Silence, deep and profound, returned to the valley. Cale pulled Serafina into his arms, his hand resting protectively over hers on her belly. As the first light of morning crested the high mesas, bathing the valley in a soft, clean glow, a new day dawned. It was a dawn they had fought for, one they had earned with their own blood and courage. The storm had passed, and in its wake their small family remained, rooted in the desert soil, as strong and as resilient as the land itself. Their redemption wasn't in a town named for it. It was in each other. Serafina and Cale's story wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of a legacy. Their child, a son, was born in the quiet peace of their valley, a bridge between two worlds, a living symbol of a love that refused to be broken by hate or prejudice. They proved that a person's worth isn't defined by their family, their past, or the bitter judgments of others. It's defined by the strength of their own heart and the courage to fight for the destiny they choose. Their story became a quiet legend in the canyons, a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of lands, hope can take root and blossom in the most unexpected of ways. If their story of resilience and love moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who loves a story of the human spirit's triumph. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the untamed heart of the Old West. Thank you for listening.